All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Conscious Living Spiritist group and their Sunday meeting. And today we have a very interesting topic, I dare say. It's called the Law of Society and Mental Health. This talk itself was inspired by, or not inspired, I guess it was suggested, strongly suggested by my friend Abigail, who gave me the book called, talking about like the different laws that we find in Spiritism, like law of destruction, law of progress, etc. And so each chapter is one different law. And she's like, hey, I would love if you could do a talk on the law of society and mental health. So all the laws sort of connect to that. So she's like, oh, can you do a talk on law of society and mental health? So yeah, sure, let's do it. So I got the book with her. I got to read the chapter, which is very, very interesting, sort of connecting these two ideas, the law of society that we find, like I was saying, very well described in Spiritism, as well as mental health, which is a topic that is very professionally dear to me, personally dear to me, and connecting those two through the lens of Spiritism. It certainly is a very interesting task, and I wanted to bring that a little bit of what the book talks about and some more understandings to everyone that's here today. So I think it's important to start with the law itself. So if we go to the Spirits book, question 766, Kardec is going to ask the spirits, is social life found in nature? And they're going to say, certainly. God has made men for living in society. It is not without a purpose that God has given to man the faculty of speech and other faculties necessary to the life of relation. So when they're saying yes, almost saying, of course, it is very much in nature. God has created everything, as we know. Why do we have language? Why do we have ways to communicate? Why have we been given this mechanism / opportunity to connect with other people, to interact with other people, to live with other people? There must be a reason. It's not just a social custom or not just something out of thin air. It is definitely something that we can find in nature, because after all, we are also part of nature. If we think of nature as creations of God, we're also part of that too. We're also creations. So they're saying, yes, it is not without a purpose. Of course, we don't know all God's designs. We don't know everything that God intends or intended whenever something happened, but we know that if we're here in this way, in this manner, with the mechanisms that we have at our disposal, the tools, it must be a reason. Is absolute isolation, that's the follow-up question, or the question right after, contrary to the law of nature? So if we were following the rationale here, if we were made, let's say, to live in society, to be social beings, as we are, because not every animal is, but we are. So if we are like that, is absolute isolation contrary to the law of nature? So isolating ourselves completely from society, all being hermits, is that contrary to the law of nature? Yes. Since man instinctively seeks society, and since all men are intended to help forward the work of progress by aiding one another. This is very key here, because whenever we think about mental health now, whenever we think about the law of society, I guess we can summarize the talk in one sentence: people drive us crazy. That's the relation between law of society. Living in society will drive us crazy. That's it. End of talk. No, but if we think about what does it mean then for this law of society, for us to be human beings, and how does that impact our individual mental health, which in the end is the mental health of everybody out there, which is the society, because we grow together. And this answer, I think, talks a little bit about that, because they're going to say, yes, since man instinctively seeks society, so we have this instinct to seek society, and since all men are intended to help forward the work of progress by aiding one another. So we instinctively seek society, and because of now the law of progress, we have within us this ability, this capacity, and this duty to help one another, so we all progress. So the law of society, therefore, and mental health goes around this idea that if we're seeking health and in this case specifically mental health, let's think it this way, we're going to achieve that. We already have the roadmap here through helping one another, through aiding everybody forward, aiding everybody in the progress that we all are meant to have. And if we are together in life, if we are together as social beings, and I said there must be a reason why God has created us in that way, we can be certain of one thing, because we may not, and we surely don't understand everything that God has done or does, but we understand one thing about God, that is infinitely good, just, fair, merciful, all love. So if we are this way, despite all the suffering we see around us, that we may sometimes think, oh my God, why is all of this happening? How is that fair? Where is God? We've had these questions, or we've heard these questions before. We have to think that God is fair, just, love, and merciful. So if we are here in this way, there must be a fair, loving reason for that. So that, I think, already aids us in developing this idea of mentally healthy individuals. Now, the question right after that: does man, in seeking society, only yield to a personal feeling, or is it there in this feeling a wider providential end? So they're going to say man must progress. He cannot do so alone. That's it. That's the answer already. We cannot progress alone. Because as he does not possess all faculties, he needs the contact of other men. In isolation, he becomes brutified and stunted, meaning the growth is stunted. The moral, intellectual, even emotional growth is stunted, meaning it's stopped or very much delayed. So there's this idea behind this that we need the contact of one another because, number one, we don't possess all the faculties. We're each individual beings here. We're all in the same boat called Earth, but we're each unique sailors. We each possess our own set of skills, and we each possess our own set of problems that we must still face, these things that we must still overcome. And I'll talk pretty soon about a big one. But we're all very unique. We're all very individual. We need one another. That's the way it is. And people need us too. So we can all help each other. That's the crux of the law of society and mental health. Once we achieve a better understanding, we can apply these things, we will be able to live better, to live healthier, mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, morally. Can expand this to however many facets that we want. He cannot do so alone because as he does not possess all the factors. I also think about different talents if we think about this now. So if we were to live by ourselves, let's say each person here has a mountain, a beach, a forest, whatever you like. What happens with all the other faculties that I still need to develop? What happens with the type of knowledge that I don't possess, that a doctor does, that somebody else does? So all these different talents that people bring, and think of our society, the miscellaneous of talents and professions and tastes and interests. That's such a beautiful thing. I like to think of it as a painting. Like when you have all the colors kind of like mixed together, it creates this work of art. That's how society is, with all of us having different hues. There's different colors that we all add to the painting. Each color being very unique. And I think that the faculties here we can also think of in the sense of not everybody possesses all the skills. We don't possess all the skills, therefore we need other people as well. Somebody who is very interested and has a certain talent in a certain way that I don't have, and my life is going to be made better because of that. And I can help them with my own talents as well, and their life's going to be better. And this way we all progress together. Otherwise, if we live in isolation, or if we were to live completely isolated, our progress would be stunted. We would be brutified in the sense of being brutes, more like brutes. Now, what is to be thought of those who live in absolute seclusion in order to escape the pernicious contact of the world? What about those who seek that? People who become tired of society, don't want to see anybody, don't want to talk to anybody, don't want to do anything, only worry about themselves, and they go off and they cut themselves off completely. What to think of that? The life of such persons is twice, selfish. In avoiding one evil, they fall into another. since they forget the law of love and charity. How can I be charitable? How can I be loving? How can I learn forgiveness if I'm living by myself? How can I fight off selfishness if everything I'm doing, everything I'm consuming, everything I'm creating, everything, 24 hours of my day is dedicated towards me, 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 me? How can I learn that? How can I learn charity? How can I learn discipline? How can I learn all these things that are so pivotal in our progress as human beings if I'm all by myself? The answer is I can't. I can't. It does not suffice. It's not enough. We need one another. And they're saying here, because they forget the law of love and charity. What did Jesus do? Did Jesus went and live on a mount on his own and that's it? Planting his own food, not in contact with anybody else? Because he's a spirit that is extremely, extremely evolved. We're all like here, he's here. He could very well be like, no, you guys do your thing. I'll do mine here. He didn't. He didn't. He went with the intriguers, that message that we saw in the beginning. He went with those who disagree with him. He healed the sick. He did all those things, and he never questioned who was coming to ask him questions, or he never refused to talk to people. Oh no, this person is truly somebody who does not believe anything I'm doing here. I'm not going to talk to you. Like, if you believe a little bit, we'll talk. Of course not. We never saw that. And since he's our model and he's our guide, we must look at him and look at the things that he did and understand that there is a reason for that. There is a higher reason that we still don't understand fully or can embrace it fully. But that's the guide. That's the model. That's the north in our compass there that we must follow. So whenever we think of this complete seclusion from the world, severing any sort of ties that we have with society, we're being doubly selfish. And then the question 778, so like this is 7070, they have like literally a follow-up question to that, where Kardec is going to ask, well, what if those seclusions, they are sort of like an expiation? In the sense of, what if the spirit did so many bad things in society that now he's saying like, no, now I'm gonna have to live by myself because I was not able to live among my brothers and sisters, and like, what about that one? Is that considered also doubly selfish? What is that? And then they're going to say, the best of all expiations is to do a greater amount of good than you have done of evil. I love this answer. I'm going to repeat it. The best of all expiations is to do a greater amount of good than you have done of evil. Notice that they're not saying not to do any evil whatsoever. Which is interesting, because it's also taking into account, the spirits were wise who answer this, which is also taking into account our own degree of evolution, that we're still very much tied to the matter, we're still very much evolving as spirits, so we will make mistakes, we will act selfishly, we will act with pride, we will act with all these things that are evils, but they're saying to do a greater amount of good than you do of evil. Meaning the stuff that you do right to be greater than the stuff that you do wrong. Not to do anything wrong. Because if we try to go by living our lives without making mistakes, without disappointments, if I want to live my life without pain or disappointment, I'm only going to encounter one thing. Pain and disappointment, because that's what it is. That's how life is. If I want to live my life without pain, I'm going to have pain. Even if it's the pain of disappointment. That I thought I was never going to make a mistake again, and I made a mistake. Or the pain of regret. So when we're talking about living in society, when we're talking about mental health, we're thinking about doing greater good, amount of good than we have done or we do of evil, and we can only achieve that through society. We can only achieve that through living with one another, through living with other individuals in a society where each person is very unique, where each person has their own problems, where each person has their own qualities, their own defects, has their own baggage that they have been carrying for millennia now, of reincarnation after reincarnation, after reincarnation, all these identities that we have. Because it's one thing about Spiritism. We understand that the soul is immortal and goes through different lives, different reincarnations, getting into a body of flesh, material body, again, reincarnation. So we know that. So we know that everybody is unique. So it's part of that that's going to help us be healthier and have a healthier contact with other individuals when we understand that everybody is entitled to their opinion. People are unique. And I think that nowadays, more than ever, if we think about the DSM-5, now TR, for instance, which is a Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Health Disorders used by psychiatrists, clinical psychologists, and all of that. If we think of all the diagnoses that are there, the group of disorders that has seen the most increase in their diagnosis in the last decade is anxiety disorders. In other words, people are more anxious. After that, we have depression, but anxiety disorders, it's interesting for us to think, why anxiety is so high? Like, why statistically we're seeing this increase in anxiety? A lot of it is society, is uncertainty in the relations with others, is the speed that technology moves, is social media as well. Because now, before, let's say 40 years ago, 30 years ago even, you had an opinion, and let's say you lived in this group where everybody sort of share your way of being, share your opinion, and that was your reality. But nowadays, with the advent of the internet, with social media specifically, or YouTube, whatever you can think of, whatever opinion you have about anything, I guarantee you there's somebody out there that has a completely contrary opinion than yours. That sees things completely different than how you see it. I guarantee you there is somebody, and I guarantee you can find them online. And you can watch videos, you can read what they're saying, read their books, whatever it is. But nowadays, with the ease of the ease of this access to information, we are seeing a lot of things that we don't like. And we become upset because how can that person say that? How can that person believe that? That's what? No way. I'm going to prove them wrong. And we become keyboard warriors. And then we become anxious. And all these things are happening right now with technology. Now we have, AI, which is again also a double-edged sword, same as the internet, same as all the other technological advancements we've had. People are becoming more anxious because of the uncertainty. And then when we find anxiety, we find mental health conditions through the contact of others, where people are becoming more stressed out, less patient with one another as well. And what we're seeing all these issues that derive from living together, because now we live as a whole world. Even the whole idea of comparing ourselves to one another. If you think, I feel bad because I sometimes compare myself with that person, they're better looking than me, they're stronger than me, they're smarter than me, whatever it is, whatever comparison we draw, nowadays is amplified. You know why? Internet, social media. Whereas before, but think about it, why am I always comparing myself to others? Why am I getting so anxious that I'm not doing this so well as that person in that country is doing? If you think about it, from thousands and thousands of years ago, we lived in small groups, in tribes, let's call it. We lived in tribes, in small groups. Our chances of survival all the way back then rested in our ability to connect, because the group was stronger in terms of seeking shelter, seeking food, fighting off other enemies, fighting off animals. So this idea that we compare ourselves to others, it's almost like this hereditary piece that we bring, because back then, people who lived in isolation likely died, but people who were able to compare themselves and say hey, I don't want to get kicked out of this group, I need to start planting some plants here as well, or I need to start pitching in. Those people who compared themselves and adapted lived, passed on their genes. How crazy is that? But the problem is now, we're not comparing ourselves just with the person next to me. I'm comparing myself to anybody. So anything that I think that I do, that I'm very good at this, takes 10 seconds online to find somebody who's doing it better than me. And that creates a lot of angst. That creates a lot of and then there's the hurt pride and all these things that interfere with the law of society. So the life in isolation is contrary to the law of society. It's only going to create more mental health problems, because we need to be with one another so we can evolve, so we can do more good than what we're doing in terms of evil. And if we think of now to the gospel according to Spiritism, so we were in the Spirit's book, now the gospel according to Spiritism, they're going to say that all of Jesus' morals are summed up in charity and humility. That is, the two virtues contrary to selfishness and pride. So charity and humility are the antithesis of selfishness and pride. Because if I'm selfish, I won't be charitable. If I'm prideful, I won't be humble. In a very simple term, that's what it is. But when we think about charity and humility, when we think about even question 886 from the Spirit's book, how did Jesus understand charity? And they answered three things: benevolence towards others or towards everyone, indulgence towards the perfections of others or the mistakes or failures of others, and forgiveness of injuries. So Jesus understood charity as benevolence, indulgence, and forgiveness. Notice the common thread in all three things. It's done with other people. Benevolence for everyone, indulgence for the imperfections of others, and forgiveness of injuries. This relates to everyone. That's why we need the law of society. That's why we need that. That's why we need to be in a society so we can practice all these things that are there. Because otherwise, without that, we won't be able to practice charity. We won't be able to practice humility as well. And that's very key when we're talking about living better in society and having less mental health problems. And selfishness is one that is over and over and over in the book that I told you that I read about this chapter, about this. It's a lot there. We see that a lot in the gospel, all the books from the codification, and so many others from Joanna, from André Luiz, from Emmanuel. We're going to find things talking about selfishness and pride. And selfishness, Joanna, for instance, she's going to say this, alongside, and this is in the book Plenitude, psychographed by Divaldo. Alongside the karmic origins of suffering arises its immediate causes, okay? Instances in which man brings it upon himself through irresponsibility, impulsiveness, and the dominance of an egoism or selfishness that incites him to choose what is best for himself to the detriment of his neighbor. Meaning, alongside those reasons for our suffering that are rooted in things that, let's say, we've done in the past, that's why she's saying karmic origins. Things that we have done in the past that we need to expiate now, that we need to bring back the balance that we lost because we were in a path of good, then we deviated from that path. Let's say I hurt somebody else, or I misused completely something that I had to use wisely. I'm going to have to expiate that to restore that balance. But she's saying alongside that, suffering also comes from the things that we do wrong here and now, or imperfections. Irresponsibility, impulsiveness, and the dominance of selfishness. When selfishness drives our actions, and we choose what she's saying, we choose, and I put in bolded there, we choose what's best for ourselves in detriment of someone else. It's the me, mine, mine. And that causes so many mental health issues. Now again, bringing back to mental health. When this is the root cause of a lot of these behaviors that we see in society, a lot of behaviors that we see in ourselves sometimes as well. So whenever we're doing that, and again, we can still think of the heritage piece here, like I mentioned before. When we were nomads, when we lived without food certainty before, whenever we encounter like food, we had to accumulate because we didn't know what the next one was going to be. There's a lot of uncertainty there. Nowadays, there's way more certainty overall with life in general in this planet. But we still carry with us that like idea of like I'm gonna accumulate more and more and more, and a lot of the times in detriment of someone else. Because if I'm taking that to myself, a lot of the times that thing that I'm taking a lot of is gonna be missing for someone else. So she's saying alongside this, and that creates what? Suffering. That's what she's talking about here. She's talking about suffering. The suffering that comes from expiations, as well as the suffering that comes from our misguided actions that are rooted in selfishness or in selfish behavior. And that causes suffering because in the end, we, each one of us, has the laws of God written in our conscience. And whenever we feel guilt, it's because we're already a little bit in touch with that, because guilt, the stronger the guilt, the wider the gap between that, the stronger the guilt. So what I know I must do and what I did, if there's a big gap there, the suffering is going to be greater. If I already know that I cannot kill somebody else and I go and I kill somebody, my guilt's going to be this. But if I already know I cannot steal something, but I don't really know, and I steal a pen, it's going to be here. So the guilt and the suffering is going to be lessened. But more and more as we evolve, we start to understand more of these laws and apply these laws, and we're going to be able to do much better. But it's a slow progress. We're all spirits that are evolving. We've been worse. We've been way worse than what we are now. But we still have a long way to go to become truly what we're meant to become. We still have a long way to go. Not for nothing, Earth is a planet of trials and tribulations, trials and expiations, atonements, however we want to call it. That is the second of 5. So we have primitive worlds who are worse than Earth. But we're in second of 5, so that already tells us a little bit of where we are in terms of our whole journey as spirits. And that's okay, because we are progressing. We are progressing. Now, social ties. So this, question 774, they're going to ask whether ties of family. Now let's go to the micro. Let's go talk about family, because that also has to do with mental health and law of society. Whether family ties are merely social customs or are they also a law of nature? They're going to say social ties are necessary to progress, and social ties are drawn closer by family ties. For this reason, family ties are a law of nature as well. Wow. Okay. So not only living with people overall, but like my own family, yes. God has willed that man should learn through them to love one another as brothers. So as, not brothers necessarily, but as, brothers, sisters, siblings. Because in the end, that's what we are. We are all children of the same Creator. But when we are in a specific family, when we have that specific cell of society, if we think of family as being the small cell of society, or those who live close to us, we have the best opportunity right there to mend ties that were otherwise broken, to accumulate the treasures from up there, the virtues. Family, therefore, is this law of nature, but it's in the family that we see so much issues arising that cause mental health conditions. And even if we look again, I mentioned the DSM-5, even if we look at the DSM and we see a lot of disorders there, a lot of conditions, you'd be surprised how many involve something social, meaning difficulty socializing, either because they don't want to, or because they can't, or because they don't have the skills, or because of the mental health disorder, now they're becoming more secluded, or because they don't have the energy to socialize, or because they have all these problems in their mental health, with these disorders that cause the person to have some sort of conflict with those around them, social. So we see a lot of that, but in the families where we see these ties, it's part of nature. These ties, therefore, become stronger. And then question 775 is great, because they're going to say, what would be the effect upon society of the relaxation of family ties? So what would be the effect if family ties were, let's say, relaxed, or people didn't pay too much attention to them, or let's say I was born in as this family, but I don't want anything to do with those people. They have nothing to do with me, so I just sever my ties completely, seclude myself completely from them. What's that? And if everybody did that, what would that be? What would that result? A relapse into, here it is, that word again, selfishness. A relapse into selfishness. That's their answer. And that is a big, big deal with society, and mental health directly links to that. These issues of selfishness that are bringing so much trouble to our behaviors and how we behave to one another. And so somebody may say, okay, so you're talking a lot about selfishness, so what do we do with selfishness then? How can we combat selfishness? Question 917 now I bring to you the answer to that. So by what means can selfishness be destroyed? Of all human imperfections, they give a little of a longer answer. They're going to say, the most difficult to root out is selfishness because it is connected with the influence of matter from which man, still too near his origin, has not yet been able to enfranchise himself, in which his laws, his social organization, his education all tend to maintain. Selfishness will be gradually weakened. Here's the good news. As your moral life obtains predominance over your material life. So as we evolve morally, selfishness is going to start to decrease or become less influential, which also is congruent with this idea that the more we evolve, the less the matter has influence over the spirit. In a very primitive state, it's matter, matter, matter. We're all driven by only our passions, brutality, all of those animal instincts. But as we start to evolve, that starts to decrease, and then the spirit starts to become even more influential over matter. And that's when we start to see the decrease of selfishness, when we start to understand charity, when we start to understand humility, and the necessity of living with one another and respecting, and at the very, very pinnacle of that, loving one another as Jesus has loved us. Loving one another, really. Living together in society in that way. Because, as they say here, we're still very much close to that infancy stage versus the final stage, if we were to put in very simple terms. We're still closer to that than to the final stage. But like I said, we're already progressing, we're still progressing. And every day is going to depend on us, how fast or how slow we progress. Depends on us, because we have free will. Also, in this answer, I love the fact that they also allude to this idea that our social organizations, our law, our education, they all tend to maintain that. Maintain what? Maintain selfishness. What is something that society highlights? Power, fame, money. What are those things if not selfishness and pride? Really? But those things, unfortunately, are still highlighted. Those things are the things that people want to see, people want to consume. Those are the things that sell. And that's what people are aspiring to do, not realizing that in that way, they're becoming more prideful and more selfish. But everybody else is doing, right? So I got to do it too. I'm not going to be left out. And that becomes an issue when we start to act that way. And then what happens? Disappointment, pain, and when we least expect, anxiety, depression, and so many other issues that we can think of. So the family itself, and I love this quote from Heaven and Earth, because if we think of the family, like a lot of the times, the family is going to be the biggest point of conflict for a lot of us. And that's not for nothing. Because the family is the microcosm of redemptive obligations. Redemptive. Look at this word, redemptive. Obligations. In which we live to serve the greater family that comprises all humankind. So this was Clarencio, who's one of the characters of this book, psychographed by Chico, was telling André, the author, so he was telling André this exact sentence when they were studying a specific case about a family in the book, and he was saying, is the microcosm, I love this, microcosm, because if you think of, like I said, a family is what? It's like the small cell of an entire organism called society. So is this microcosm of redemptive obligations. These are the people, be it by blood or not, by the way, these are the people that we have something that we must work with. And I'm being very general on purpose because there's no way for us to know everybody. And there's no way to know sometimes even ours. But we can know one thing. If we're together there, there's a reason for that. Because God, again, God is fair, love, kind, merciful, just. Infinite in all those His qualities. So if we have that specific cell, or we are in that specific cell, there is a reason. And that reason is fair and just. So we must take the opportunity, seize the opportunity, and mend those ties and learn with them and teach them. Truly, truly live the law of charity and humility first in our own homes. Not outside, because a lot of times outside is easier. There's less problems outside. There's less conflict outside. But in our families, that's the microcosm of redemptive obligation. And just for, if anybody here is still getting to know Spiritism a little bit, in the Spirit's book, question 204, they're going to ask, do our relationships extend beyond our present existence? Meaning, my relationship with those people, especially those close to me, and again, I want to highlight this, be by blood or not, okay? Those people in my family, do our relationship extend beyond it? And they're going to say that it cannot be another way, yes. And that's why they're going to say sometimes you have these antipathies, or you have these conflicts that if we were to look with a superficial eye, we would think, oh my God, how is that relationship between A and B in that family so rough when A only does good things for B? Or vice versa. Or why do they gravitate more towards one member, not the other? All these questions are answered by this, because our relationships extend beyond our present existence. If we are all immortal spirits and we have had different reincarnations, different lives, it's very likely, even if we're thinking like, really, can it be? Well, if we had a lot of reincarnations, odds are that we probably lived with those people before in some capacity, or we encountered them in some capacity. And I'm saying this in a inquisitive way, but the reality is yes, we have. That's the answer, we have. And if we have and we're with them again, because sometimes, as we see in all these books, it can take years, decades, centuries sometimes to be able to get those people together in that family and say, now you guys have a chance. You finally have that chance again. Are we going to squander that? Are we going to throw that to waste? We can't. Because otherwise we get to the other side of life and we have regret and we have disappointments. And we want another opportunity with those people again, but who knows? Because of the free will, each person may take a different route. And that is very key for us when we're talking about the law of society. Because even in question 205, Kardec's going to say, well, this doctrine of reincarnation, or this idea of reincarnation, may appear to some people as something that destroys family ties. Because if you're carrying them back to a previous existence, if you're putting previous enemies under the same roof, are you not going to destroy these ties? Like, how can you do that? It extends those ties, that's the answer, but it does not destroy them. On the contrary, the conviction that the relationships of the present life are based upon anterior affections renders the ties between members of the same family less precarious. It makes the duties of fraternity even more imperative, because in your neighbor or in your servant may be incarnated some spirit who has formerly been united to you by the closest ties of consanguinity or of affection. So the doctrine of reincarnation, or this idea that we are together with people that we may have had issues before, and I'm saying may, put an asterisk in may, most likely have had, it's going to actually strengthen the family ties, because in the end, if we think of the family, think of everybody being children of the one and only. And as parents, if we have children, plural, we want them to get along with one another. We want them to mend any problems they have as parents. So imagine God, our Father. He wants us to mend all of that too. So that's why we come in these family situations with different material envelopments. with different names, with different faces perhaps, but the Spirit is the same, and we live for that. If love towards one's neighbor is the principle of charity, loving one's enemies, is its sublime application for such a virtue, is one of the greatest victories attainable over selfishness and pride. That's it. If love towards one's neighbor is the principle of charity, loving the enemy is the sublime application of that law. Because it's very easy for us to love the neighbor that's very kind to us, very nice, that likes the stuff that we do, that compliments us, and we like the stuff they do, we compliment them back. It's easy. But the application of this is when you love the enemies, even those that you don't necessarily know how to explain why you don't like them. That's the application of this. And that is, such a virtue is one of the greatest victories over selfishness, because once I start to love the neighbor, once I start to love my enemy specifically, I'm very much fighting off pride and selfishness within me. And that is a move in the right direction. And when we talk about love society, when we talk about family, think of how many enemies we have out there. Or adversaries, we can say, even to make it easier on the ear. So a lot of the times it's hard because we're still very impulsive. And I wanted to bring a little piece here that I always like to put in my I always try to put this in my talks. But whenever we're thinking of law of society, we think of this ability to communicate, we're thinking of mental health issues, or we're thinking about this conflict that arises from our tongue that is too quick, which is the only muscle of the body that doesn't get cramps. It should sometimes. It would be better, right? Instead of saying something, our tongue got a cramp, start to cramp up instead of saying something you regret. That would be great. It's not like that. So we have our tongues that are uncramped muscle, uncrampable muscle. So then what we must do to live good or live in a society that's in a very healthy way, I wanted to mention one thing that he doesn't not mention in the book, but I always try to bring this. We have to sometimes be able to sit in silence. We have to be able to silence ourselves before we say something that's going to come out as hurtful, or we're just going to be reacting because of our wounded pride, or because it went against our selfishness. How can we do that? Here's something that I brought, the triple filter of Socrates that I mentioned before. I always love this. Socrates said, before you're going to say anything, see if what you're going to say is going to pass through these three different filters: the truthfulness, goodness, and usefulness. What am I about to say? Is it true what I'm about to say? And I'm going to add a follow-up here. Can I be certain that that's true? Nowadays with fake news, with whatever it is, right? Can I really say that that's true? Can I know that that's true? Number two, is it good? Okay, let's say what I want to say is good, is truthful. But is it also good? Is it also rooted in a sense of goodness? Yes, okay, past those two. Then the third one, useful, or the filter of usefulness. Is it useful to that person, what I'm about to say? Because it may be true and it may be rooted in goodness, but sometimes it's not going to be useful to the person, or the timing is not going to be the best timing, or it shouldn't come from me. Even if it's true, even if it's good. If we were to live in society all carrying this, which is so hard to apply, but if we were all to carry this, and whatever we said, we were about to say, would pass these three filters, Socrates says you may say it. Then you can say it. Wow, how many issues we would be able to not get into if we just stay quiet sometimes, because whatever we're about to say is not going to pass through the filter, the triple filter. And I think that I wanted to give that to you guys, because it is something that we can apply very easily in the sense of understanding it. Of course, the application is hard, but it's easily to understand, to apply. And you start with the small things. Whenever you're getting heated up, whenever you're becoming upset, try to remember this. Wait, what I'm about to say now, is it true? Is it good? Is it useful? And I guarantee you're going to feel very proud of yourself if you're able to actually stay quiet and not say it because it didn't pass the filter. Now, Joanna de Angelis in the book Jesus in Our Days, now getting more towards the end of the talk today. She says that illness, because we're talking mental health, is nothing more than a symptom of the disorder of the spirit. In reality, the bearer of it, the bearer of the illness, the disorder. A lot of the times, what we're seeing in the mental health, the concerns about mental health related to the law of society, is because our spirits are still very much sick. And we need sometimes the sick body to heal the sick spirit. A lot of the times, the sick body is a result of the sick spirit, or the actions that spirit took that lead to sickness. And here I'm not just talking mental, I'm talking physical as well. So this one is interesting too. If physicians fail in treating most ailments, it is because they treat the body without treating the soul. And since the whole is not in a good state, it is impossible for any one part of it to be well. If we have one part of a fruit basket, a lot of apples, one is very rotten, we can't say that whole basket is good. Here, I'm selling you this whole basket. You can eat everything. No, because there's one rotten apple, 2, 3, whatever. So how can we try to treat most ailments, or understand, or try to see mental health disorders, for instance, just thinking about the biological piece, just thinking about the psychological piece, without ignoring the spirit, the soul that's behind that? We can't. And who said that? Was it Allan Kardec? Was it Emmanuel? Was it Andrea, Joanna? Was it any of these spiritists that we know? No, it was Socrates. Way before 1857, when we had Spiritism start. Way before that. And this sentence that he talks, or the specific passage, is in the introduction of the Gospel According to Spiritism. And you can see there, a lot of these thoughts were already things that were a prelude to what was to come. And to close today, I wanted to talk about what Joanna said. And I think this summarizes very well the law of society and mental health, and in doing charity, because we talked about charity and humility, specifically charity as this way to combat selfishness, which will increase the mental health, physical health, emotional health of everyone. She's going to say, while selfishness conspires against charity, charity is the only effective therapy life offers to develop feelings of brotherhood and justice among men. It's a therapy. And I bolded therapy there because it has to do with mental health. So charity is the effective therapy to develop what? To these feelings of brotherhood and to combat selfishness. As humanity acquires knowledge and develops a sense of self-worth, selfishness will give way to a new psychological and behavioral mindset, bringing both health and emotional enrichment to achieve the happiness that everyone aspires to. So as we acquire knowledge, and we have been granted this knowledge from Spiritism almost 200 years ago now. So a lot of us, this is not our first time reading about this, studying Spiritism. As we acquire that knowledge, as we develop a sense of self-worth, selfishness will give way to this new way of being, this new, healthier psychological and behavioral mindset that will very much affect society, affect how we live with one another, how we relate to one another, and how we relate to ourselves, because the outside is a reflection of what we carry inside. So charity, that's the most effective therapy for selfishness, for mental health conditions, a lot of the times that we have because of the contact with one another in a society that is very much made of all these unique individuals that also have their problems and their qualities. So charity, that's the final message to summarize law of society and mental health. Thank you for your patience, for your attention. I hope in some way this was helpful, and I wish everybody a blessed week. Thank you.